And you obviously have been able to overcome that feeling. Because you're here. And you're here for the right reason. You're here to deal with the right issues. Not too very long ago, I traveled over 100,000 miles in 11 months, all across the state of Wisconsin. And everywhere I went, every single stop, I said the same thing. I said that clean air and clean water would never come from dirty politics. I said that good health care would never come from a sick political system. I said that living wages would not be the result of a dying democracy. I said that we would never get anything more than thoughts and prayers after every new mass shooting as long as elected officials were paid to take no other action. I said that at every single stop over the course of a 100,000-mile journey because I believe in my heart that the issues that brought you here today are the issues, the problems underneath all of our problems. It's why we can't make progress on climate change. It's why we can't seem to make progress on economic justice. It's why we can't seem to make progress on so many fronts, on health care. Because of the problems underneath the problems. And it's what brought you here today. It's what obviously got you to overcome that feeling of not wanting to get out of bed and not wanting to re-engage. And so thank you for being here. Now, I have been a soldier in this work for a very long time, working for democracy reform, working for redistricting reform, advocating to amend the Constitution with a 28th Amendment to say that money is not speech, corporations are not people, elected offices are not property to be auctioned to the highest bidder. But we are now at a moment, a dangerous moment in our country's history, where the question does arise, will there be a democracy to reform? Will there be a constitution to amend? And that's the first time in my 59 years that thought dawned on me. And this is after decades of work advocating a 28th Amendment to the Constitution and working for democracy reform. It never once occurred to me over the course of all those decades that maybe there could come a day where America doesn't have a democracy to reform or a constitution to amend. This is an incredibly dangerous moment that we're living in. And it's so incredibly important that people like you resist that feeling of being overwhelmed and too tired to muster the energy to fight these fights. Your job is made infinitely more challenging by another threat that is out there. All this talk of fake news, all the demonization and delegitimization of journalism makes your job so much more difficult. I was trained as a journalist, and I've worked as a news reporter. I've been in that evil trade. And it always amuses me when people say that we have a liberal media or a conservative media. There is a media bias. Unquestionably, there is media bias. It's a bias in favor of conflict. That's what really biases journalists, is the desire for conflict. There's this old saying in the business that if it bleeds, it leads. And you'll often hear people in the journalism business also say that, look, if 100 planes or 1,000 planes land safely, that's not news. If one crashes, it's news. So think about that. Bleeding is news. Healing is not. Crashing is news. Operating safely and soundly is not. And what you are trying to do is create a democracy that operates safely and soundly. What you are trying to do is promote healing. And that is not news. But it's also the work that will be the salvation of our republic. Now, people who have heard me speak before have probably heard me say this 1,000 times, if they've heard me 1,000 times. I'm very fond of saying, and I say over and over again, that democracy is more noun, it is more verb than noun. It's not something that we have, it's something that we do. It is a verb, it is not a noun. And as long as we do democracy, we can have democracy. But once we stop doing it, we won't have it anymore. And so I want to share a very brief passage from a brilliant book that was written by Parker Palmer called Healing the Heart of Democracy. It's apt because he didn't write it just recently. He wrote it a few years ago. But he said this. He said, here we are in the middle of another election cycle. Once again, false claims, half-truths, hateful rhetoric, fear-mongering and demonization of the opposition dominate our civic space, driving out the issue-oriented debate a democracy needs to survive and thrive. We need citizens with chutzpah and humility to occupy our civic space and call American democracy back to health. Chutzpah and humility are two qualities that Parker Palmer said are so incredibly important. I would add two other essential qualities to Parker's list. I often have said to people when they say, what's the most important thing that we can have if we're going to do this work? And my answer is always stamina. And I would add to that patience. The most important qualities that we can possess, aside from chutzpah and humility, are patience and stamina. Because I remind you that there are people who made amazing change happen in America, who brought about nation-changing transformation, but never lived to actually see it. Think about these people. You may not know them right off, and then again you might. Think about Rowena Grannis Steele, or Esther Hobart Morris. How about Helen Pitts, Sarah Wall, Julia Ward Howe? You might not know who these people are, or you might. They have something in common. All of those people have something very powerful in common. Yes, they were suffragists. They were advocates for the right for women to vote. But they have something much more powerful in common than that. And they share this one thing in common with Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucy Stone. All of them died before the ratification of the 19th Amendment giving women the right to vote. They devoted their lives to gaining the vote for women and never were able to cast a ballot. Never lived to see the day when any woman could. Rowena Grannis Steele died in 1901. But not before her novel, The Victims of Fate, became the first novel written by a woman to be published in the state of California. Esther Hobart Morris became the first woman justice of the peace in America, in a small town in Wyoming, but died before the 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote. Helen Pitts was perhaps best known as the second wife of Frederick Douglass. Sarah Wall led a successful anti-tax protest in Massachusetts, defending a woman's right not to be subjected to taxation without representation, and died before women had the right to vote. And Julia Ward Howe was best known for writing the Battle Hymn of the Republic.
Better known as Solidarity Forever.
Died before women had the right to vote. So suffragists not only marched, they not only worked tirelessly day after day, but some were jailed, some were beaten in prison, some were tortured, and did that work without ever seeing the 19th Amendment to the Constitution enacted and ratified in our country. And that, to me, is the spirit that we have to take to heart today. Because the work that we have to do will be republic-saving work. But it is work that will not happen tomorrow. The success will not be seen next week or next month or next year. But it is work that has to be done if we are going to get to that point where we have a democracy to reform and a constitution to amend. I would like to leave you with another brief passage that says it so much better than I ever could. But this passage is from Vaslav Havel, the Czech dissident and author turned statesman who eventually became the elected leader of Czechoslovakia. And here's something that Václav Havel once said that I think we have to embrace, we have to take to heart. Havel wrote, "Hope is not the same as joy that things are going well, or willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously headed for early success, but rather an ability to work for something because it is good, not just because it stands a chance to succeed. The more unpromising the situation in which we demonstrate hope, the deeper that hope is. Hope is not the same thing as optimism. It is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out." That is the spirit that we have to embrace as we carry on this work. We have to have hope rooted in the idea that what we are working for makes sense and is good regardless of outcome in our lifetimes. If we have any hope of handing over a functioning democracy and that precious Constitution to children and grandchildren and their children and their grandchildren, it will be because of our commitment today at a moment that is as dangerous as I have seen in 59 years on this earth. And so again, I just say to you, thank you from the bottom of my heart for caring about this, for being willing to be here today, for being willing to carry on this work when so many people are feeling overwhelmed and so many people are feeling powerless and so many people have checked out. I recently started a crowdfunding campaign to kickstart an effort to counter the rising division, the growing fear and hate and violence in our society. That crowdfunding campaign, and thousands have been invited to participate, and so far, after a week, barely 24 people have chosen to participate. And I know that that is because so many people are feeling overwhelmed. They are feeling spent because of what we've been through and because of the conditions that we see in our country. But damn it, this is exactly the moment where we have to defy those kinds of emotions and muster the energy to get back to work and rescue this country. Because if we do not do it now, we will not have a democracy to reform and we will not have a constitution to amend. So it is with that sense of not only urgency, but that stubbornness that we have to have, that I think will save this country, save this republic, and it will be your work at the community level. This will not come from the top down, from the Capitol. It will come from the ground up in communities like yours, and it will eventually work. And we will eventually prevail, even if we do not all live to see that day. Thank you so very much.